Pandemic Files podcast, hosted by Dr. David Edmond. With each episode, we will be exploring the unprecedented public health response and those involved. More information can be found at thepandemicfiles.com. You can also subscribe on your favorite platforms, including Spotify, YouTube, and SoundCloud. I would like to welcome Clay McLean to the Pandemic Files podcast. Clay has devoted his life to public service, starting as an emergency medical technician in the 1990s. He spent more than 20 years with the New Jersey Department of Corrections before retiring as a lieutenant. He was also an active member of New Jersey's Type 3 All Hazards Incident Management Team that is part of the Office of Emergency Management. During the pandemic, he was a deputy incident commander and was involved with the setup and running of the COVID field hospitals, testing sites, and the mega sites where up to 6,000 people a day were vaccinated per site. He is currently the Senior Director of Operations at Carewell Health Medical Center in East Orange, New Jersey. So to start out with, you and I knew each other back in the mid-90s. Early 90s, right? Working EMS. And then I went off to medical school. And draw a line of where your career went kind of going up to 2020.
So it was interesting. I left EMS and started to always had a thing for healthcare. Or I should say public safety, public service. That's always been my thing. And so I transitioned out of EMS and went into working for the St. Barnabas Healthcare System, as a matter of fact. I worked there for just shy of 4 years. So between that and schooling, at the time I was assigned to Irvington General Hospital. And Irvington and Beth Israel started to kind of do a shared service program. And I started seeing senior people who have been with the hospital for a long time, retiring or being let go just because of the downsizing of Irvington General Hospital. And that was kind of like the writing on the wall for me. I was a young guy with a family. So I wound up taking the police exam and got accepted to a couple of different departments. Ultimately decided to work for the state, to the State Department of Corrections. It's interesting. When people think of corrections, they have one focal point, which is prison. I basically utilized some of my previous skills and abilities and took that and was able to really utilize those skill sets. And I became a teacher. I went to the academy, was an instructor down there, taught, hundreds of recruits. I came out of the academy, worked in a couple of prisons, ultimately ended my career in our special operations group, which is the equivalent of an emergency response team, SWAT team, whatever you want to call it. Got promoted a couple of times, and the last almost 10 years of my career, I got involved in emergency management. And what we ended up doing is taking the emergency management, which was a small portion of the emergency response team in my department, and really just built off of the work that some of my predecessors did in terms of really fostering relationships within the state, and really became a major player with the other state entities. So we became immensely involved in all aspects of New Jersey OEM, working very closely with state police and all of our other allied partners. It really ended with the formation of a team called the Incident Management Team. And this was something that the state had tried to put together some years ago. It didn't fully come to fruition. We had a individual who was with state police, OEM, Mark Pellegrino, who was extremely passionate about the incident management team and literally pulled together some key individuals from different departments, which I was one, and really took this incident management team and really put together a major product of which New Jersey OEM, state police, and all of the other state partners really were able to leverage in putting together monumental tasks in a very short period of time. So that's kind of how my career path went. And during those times, lots of schooling and different educational components, both formal and informal, traditional and non-traditional. And it really prepared us for being able to pivot. And that's probably one of the key terminologies that we used very often in the role of incident management team is a group of individuals who had the ability to multitask task and pivot and reshift our focus and entire direction at the moment's notice. Again, it was something that was, you can't plan for it. You couldn't plan for it. And we were a small team. We had like 12 members that made up our team, and those 12 individuals were responsible for working very closely with the command staff at State Police and the command staff with DOH and putting together this initiative, which was amazing.
Now, the concept of an all hazards incident management team is a national concept, from my understanding, right? This is something that is deployable. What were some of the other things before the pandemic that New Jersey's all hazard incident management team had done? Keeping in mind that you all were technically not a standing organization, right? I think you had a couple of permanent members, and everybody else was, essentially on call and could be borrowed from their respective agencies.
That's correct. So we sent teams down to Georgia. They had a major disaster where they stood up a logistics support center, and a team of us went down to Georgia to support that. We were sent to Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico and assisted there. They had some storms down in Miami, Florida, in that area that we sent a team out to. Helped with some of the NASCAR events in Dover. We've helped out with music festivals. So there were a lot of different things. It really is about, when you talk about an incident management team, and we were considered a type 3 incident management team, which basically meant that we had the ability and training to oversee 250 members, entities, if you would, and being able to come in and just to kind of give a little bit of background of how incident management team works. So all emergencies start and end on a local level. So your first responders, they're the first ones to come into an emergency. They deal with it. They ask for support if it becomes bigger than what they can handle. And then they go to their, let's say, their county partners. And the county says, you know what? Yep, we've tapped all of our resources. Now we're going to go to the state level. And then the state level says, yep, we tapped all our resources. We go to the federal level. So those are the different levels. And we were a state team that had the ability. And, fortunately, at the tail end of my career, a lot of us were getting certified so that we could be a part of the federal team. When you think of what we did with a small number of individuals, an incident management team is really there to help take some of the pressure off the local responders and really gives us the ability to kind of look at an overarching issue and then start to move resources and assets based on whatever the goals and objectives that are set for that particular operational period.
And certainly during the pandemic, the incident management team also played a role, not just in building it up and starting it, but also really maintaining it and collecting a lot of the data for it. Is that normally part of the IMT's role, or was that a little bit different during the pandemic?
That's a great question. I don't think that there was anything that we did that was considered traditional. I think that everything that we did was really taking a mission and figuring it out. So if it meant the collection of data, we had parts of the incident management team that was responsible for that. In our planning section, they were responsible for all the documents and documentation and all of those things. But what we did, I would say, with all of the different allied partners we'd worked with and the federal entities that we worked with, definitely was far beyond the scope of a normal type 3 incident management team.
From a civilian perspective, I really saw the IMT as a combination of operations combined with project management. And anybody who's worked in industry, project managers are the ones who end up making sure that everything gets done on time, on budget if necessary, and coordinating all those pieces that just fall into that. What I came to realize, it was that combination of being able to be both sides of that. It was both the planning, operationalizing it, and then coordinating a number of different agencies at the same time. And as far as I'm concerned, the IMT just had, some type of magical sack that you would just dip your hands into and find whatever it was we needed, a cleaning service. You particularly became kind of like our fairy godfather. It was like we would go to you and say, well, we need something. And if it was something that wasn't like that we were getting from the hospitals or we could do, and you all figured it out. When did the IMT first start getting ready for the pandemic? Was it like in March when, people started dying, or were you guys already beginning to kind of look at this in January or February when most of us were kind of ignoring this?
So you know what's interesting? Of course, we started hearing buzzes about COVID. I believe it was in January of 2020, and as Iron Reading would have it, several members of the IMT were hired on our own time to go out to Seattle, Washington to teach what we call the 0305 course, which is basically basic IMT. So as we were out there, and as you know, it kind of hit out in Washington first when you started really hearing about it hitting the United States. And it was at the tail end of that particular course where you could see the folks out in Seattle starting to spin up and, eyes are opening wide. And we literally left out of there, I think it was on a Friday, if I'm not mistaken, and came back home. And it was in a very short period of time thereafter where at the time, Mark Pellegrino, who was in charge of the IMT, got a phone call from his command staff saying that, yeah, I need the IMT to stand up these testing centers. And oh, by the way, you've got, I think it was crazy, something like, 36 hours. It was like in no time. So again, our answer is can do, will do. And that's what we did. So the first part of the IMT's involvement in COVID was setting up testing centers. First one that we set up, which was down in the PNC Arts Center down in Lincroft, down in that area on the Parkway. We set that up. And again, you're talking about all of the moving pieces to make that happen, from the operationalizing the flow itself to having all of the porta potties. I mean, things like that you just don't think of that comes into it. Having clinicians to go and do swabs, having to be able to run when the weather is bad, having tents. So you had this team, this group of individuals that comes together, and it's like, okay, here's the goal. All right, now let's figure it out. Yeah, so that was the first part of our involvement was doing that.
And so that was probably, because everything seems very compressed. That's probably early to mid-March at that point, I would imagine.
Yeah, I would say if memory serves me correctly, that might have been towards the end of February is when we started to do the testing. It could have been early March, but somewhere in that general vicinity.
Right. And so that was the first thing you all were doing. And that probably seemed like a pretty large task for a short period of time to get that up and moving, to make sure it was working. So then kind of walk me through how the field hospital came about.
So when the governor's office, through the colonel of state police, who is in charge of all of emergency management, got the call that, hey, listen, we need to help decompress some of the stress that the hospitals are seeing. These hospitals are getting slammed with patients. We need to figure out a way to decompress. This whole FMS, Field Medical Station concept, came about. And again, we leveraged the federal government, because that's the model, as you just mentioned, where they have these cases of medical supplies where you are setting up hospital beds, and they're not really hospital beds, but they're cots. There's certain supplies that are included in this. When I say supplies, soft supplies, hard supplies, medical stuff. So there's all of these cartons of stuff that comes from the federal government, and you get this cache of supplies. But again, we had a footprint of what it should look like, but now it's like, okay, well, we got to find a place that has at least 50,000 square feet, because that's what the model calls for. So originally it was thought that we would open up, one field medical station, because northern Jersey was getting hit the hardest. Let's get it started. So it was interesting, because we had a forward team who was really responsible for going out there and looking for locations to set these up. And the Meadowlands Exposition Center was available. And if I'm being very honest, there was a lot of resistance from Bergen County And sure, you remember some of these stories that we had to deal with. They didn't want that in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
So we were able to massage it and get it set up there, but there was a lot of resistance from that particular community in terms of setting it up. We were able to get it up and running in a matter of a week or so, and again, we didn't have any ideas, so we had some state cache of equipment that we had to pull in from the national stockpile, but a lot of the resources came in from federal resources, federal caches of medical supplies from this FMS model.
And the one thing I learned early on was this is not just at people type of thing. A lot of stuff wasn't included in this. First we'll talk about wraparound services in a minute. Personnel's not included. A lot of what we would consider the disposable supplies are not included. I also appreciated besides the structure, you all are the keepers of momentum. It was always, and not inappropriately, but it was very clear that even if Patty and I had not been sort of result and progress driven, you were going to make sure we were. That this needed to open up as quickly as possible. And in every mission that I think the IMT took on, there's this sense of urgency that continues moving everybody else forward. Because I think you all know that the moment you lose momentum, things go off the rails.
Well, you know
part
what?
of it.
There's a process that the IMT follows. We have a planning P, and the planning P really it is how we manage anything and everything. So there's very specific times where we have meetings to talk about what's going to happen during a particular operational period. We talk about what are things that are going to happen in the next operational period. We have meetings in which we're talking about the people that are going to literally put the operation into play for that period of time. There are certain documents that we use that was basically our Bible for that particular operational period. And we had certain goals and objectives. So depending on what the goal was, and goals changed, right? Once you accomplish a certain goal, you may have to redo certain goals, and then you have to redo the objectives to meet those goals. And it was very clear, we got our marching orders from, the governor's office through the superintendent of state police and the major of emergency management. They gave us what those goals and objectives should be, and it was our responsibility to make sure that we put them into play and then make them work. So you're right. There's times where we had to put our foot on the gas pedal, and part of the IMT's responsibility is can do, will do. There's no such thing as, and it's funny because even in my current role, I tell my guys all the time, we can't hump our shoulders away to fixing a problem. You don't hump your shoulders. And the IMT did not have the luxury of humping their shoulders. It was, what's the problem? Okay, well, we were going in this direction. Well, let's pivot because now we're moving in that direction. And that's what that team did. I tell you what, Doc, it was an absolute honor working with those guys and gals because I've never seen a group of individuals who came from all different walks of life and backgrounds who interrupted their lives because we worked 20 hours a day, if not more than that, to make sure that we were taking care of the people of New Jersey. And it was an honor to work with individuals that all had the same exact goal in mind, which was let's get it done.
Yep. And I think we also matched up well. Patty's a very operationally minded person. I come from emergency medicine, so our version of can do, will do is anyone, anytime, anywhere. And a field hospital is a good chance to show that.
That's right. It doesn't become any more austere than the place of setting up a hospital in a convention center. I don't think it gets any more austere than that.
No, really. The only thing that it could have been is if we were outdoors. I mean,
That's
if we had
true.
actually been intense. Now, kind of going back to the setup, how did you know what we were going to need? Like, did it come with the instruction kit from the field hospital? Like, because it was uncannily good, to be honest with you.
So, one was having the map from the federal government of what a field hospital should be. But then we had the opportunity several of us to go over to New York City because New York had already adopted the field hospital setup. I believe it was in the Jacob Javits Center.
Yep.
So we were able to go over there and kind of get eyes on, get an idea exactly what they had, and then brought some of that back. We had some of the folks that were integral in setting up the field hospital center from the government side were brought over to us to kind of also kind of be a liaison and advisors to us in terms of what we needed. But again, it was a very, very, very basic plan in terms of the supplies that were brought in. And to the point you mentioned earlier, there was things that were missing. It really became being able to identify what are some things that are needed, because Wi-Fi wasn't included in the field hospital system. I mean, that was something that we had to identify and bring to fruition. Food wasn't inside the cache. So, I mean, the only thing that was in there were just medical supplies. It was really coordination with Department of Health and getting guidance from them in terms of things that were needed, and with the understanding that when you hear Department of Health, you're thinking clinicians, but they're not always. That's not always the case. Again, it was really just a collaborative effort in terms of being able to partner up with folks who were in the medical center over in New York and stealing some ideas from them, but also just us collaborating with DOH folks in determining, what are some things that we need to get this place fully functional.
And assuming that this was the first time you all had set up a hospital, how do you find the vendors? Like, do you just go through the phone book and go, okay, oxygen supplies, air gas, let me call, what's
Yeah.
that process like?
Yeah, so we had on the IMT for this particular mission, we had a logistics guy. And again, a part of the incident management team, logistics is a major component of it. And Mike DeGenny. And it's fortunate because you have individuals that have multiple backgrounds. So he had EMS background, I had EMS background. You just start to leverage some of the things that maybe you don't do on your normal job. And Mike did a fabulous job in terms of like being able to say, okay, let me call Praxair, let me call Airgas, let me call X, let me call Y. And that's literally how we started to pull some of these resources in. It was just being able to leverage some background that people had. And like I said, Mike did an awesome job as our logs chief.
The other thing was, this happens in disasters frequently, and people want to be helpful. And I don't think I ran into anybody who said no to me on anything. And I think about the various vendors we used, they were all in. I remember one of the senior VPs from the oxygen company literally drove some supplies that they had made for us so that we could distribute oxygen better in the field hospital. Because he didn't trust, not that he didn't trust FedEx, but he was like, there's no way I'm going to hand this to somebody else after we spent 2 days getting it and people worked 24 hours to make it, drove it in from Pennsylvania. It was like a 3-hour drive each way during the pandemic, and dropped it off.
Unique circumstances call for unique people. And I think that, having people realize that this was a people problem, didn't matter who you were, where you were from. This was a very unique people problem. Everyone stepped up to the plate. So you had those individuals that, there was no such thing as that's not my job.
Yep.
It truly was all hands on deck, and let's save lives. Let's make a difference.
So now, in the previous things you had done, obviously, I think you all had worked with military before. So as I've talked about earlier, we had a large New Jersey National Guard presence, both on the medical side and what I would say was on the operational logistics side. I think the roughly dozen or 24 people who exist in the IMT weren't the ones who built the field hospital out. You brought in, I think it was National Guard or maybe even regular military help. And obviously you had already worked with groups that were familiar with incident command, like the Department of Health, the EMS Task Force for New Jersey. Certainly the military has a little bit of a different style for incident command, but they're used to having a structure. How much had you all worked with essentially civilians, right? So people who were maybe from hospitals, but maybe not necessarily, who may or may not have have been familiar with disaster planning and response before compared to the pandemic?
So I think that's one of the unique things of being in an emergency management, because you're working with not just government organizations, but you're working with NGOs as well, non-government organizations. So whether or not it's a Superstorm Sandy, where you have NGOs supporting some of the government organizations, or if it's anytime we stood the rock up, which was the New Jersey Regional Operations and Intelligence Center, there was a mix of departments that were there. So it wasn't just all law enforcement or first responders in terms of your basic understanding of what an emergency responder looks like, but you had people from agriculture that's a part of the emergency management world. So I think that emergency management in itself really creates an environment where you're working with all different types of entities. And again, it's all about being able to either respond to or plan for, recover from, or mitigate any type of emergency situation. So it doesn't really matter what's on your lapel or your shirt sleeve. It's really just a matter of all people having that same basic understanding of emergency management. And one of the things that we would say in the emergency management world is that it's better to know people on a blue sky day than to try to figure out someone when you're in the middle of an incident. And, I think that's one of the uniqueness of New Jersey in itself, is that we literally knew everyone between the SIMPS meetings that we would have, between the OHS&P meetings that we had. We saw the same people in the same pool. So whether or not it was someone from DEP or someone from agriculture or someone from transit or what have you, like, we literally had already started to foster these relationships prior to. So it made it a lot easier during the pandemic, because it wasn't a matter of, well, let me call X for this widget. It was a name attached to that person. Hey, let me call Jim and say, hey, Jim, we need. And that's really, I think, one of the things that propelled us to having successful relationships, because of the relationships that we already had with all of these entities prior to.
I think having seen the OEM as a whole and the IMT specifically throughout the pandemic, you all develop relationships. It doesn't feel like a one-off with you all. Like, you're developing relationships, and that turned out to be incredibly important because, the IMT kind of wound down after probably in the summer of 2020, but it wasn't that long that then the IMT comes back for the mega sites for vaccines, and a lot of those same relationships were replayed over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. So, my role during the pandemic, I was the deputy incident commander for the incident management team, whereas Mark was the incident commander. He was dealing directly with the command staff and getting kind of the orders sent down to us. Then he and I would work with the team and pushing out that information to the team. And then when it was time for us to transition to another location, I kind of stayed behind to manage those organizations that we were currently working with, manage the site until we transitioned to the next site, and that one was now scaling down. So it again is just, from my perspective, it was not being the smartest person in the room, but it was about being able to leverage the relationships and leverage the people that did have the answers. That's really
Absolutely.
what operations is all about.
So 2 months into the function, not even, probably 6 weeks into the functioning of the field hospital, we had already kind of gotten everything down, and everything was working comfortably. And then, of course, you all come to us with a need for a transition, which was there was another space available that turned out to be in an old rehab building next to East Orange General in East Orange. But that was being built out for a little bit of a different purpose. Initially, they had kind of looked at that as possibly becoming almost like a nursing home to a certain extent.
Long-term, yeah, like ACS.
Yeah, like long-term care during like an ACS. Were you all involved in the ACS? And ACS standing for Alternative Care Site, I believe. Were you all involved in the extensive work that went into preparing that building?
So again, so we had a forward team that was responsible for going out, identifying the site, and the Army Corps of Engineers went into that particular building. And when you think about all of the different people that it takes to make something like this happen, it just so happened that the president and CEO of at then East Orange General Hospital, Paige Dworak, she offered up her space. she decanted her entire building, moved all of her people out, moved all of the equipment out, and said, "Here we are. How can we help?" The New Jersey, the Ford team that we have for New Jersey State Police and Emergency Management came in. They identified the location. They got the Army Corps of Engineers to come in, and they put in a ton of money to get that place ready. Again, it was 6 floors in that building, and we had to make 250 beds. So they took spaces and offices, and they had, different contractors working on different floors. So you have one build out maybe a little bit different, but the general concept was there. And literally within a week and a half's worth of time, they transitioned that place into a building that was able to take in 250 people.
And that, as you know, that was a little bit of a difficult transition for, I think, Patty and I. I think it's because, while it was great for our patients to get into places that had walls and doors and ceilings, didn't have wall gas, and I think we had some conversations about what the cost of that would be, and we all agreed that would not make any sense. We had gotten a pattern down pretty well of how to deliver oxygen to rooms. It suddenly became a lot more like a regular hospital, I think, for us. And so then, the concerns that come along with a regular hospital, like fire safety, when you're on multiple floors as opposed to a convention center that has multiple exits but all on one floor, the distance, the fact that you couldn't see everybody at the same time became much more real. And it was also a smaller area, so we would have people much closer to each other. At the same time, and if I was ever to do a field hospital concept again, being next to a hospital where you could get your wraparound services, so incredibly important. And they were great hosts. I mean, they really took the same attitude of whatever it is you need, we'll figure out how to do it.
I thought it was invaluable for us to have that relationship. And, the thing that really stands out the most is it's one thing to be in a place because you have to be there, but it's another thing to be somewhere where you're wanted. And I felt like the entire time that we were there, we were wanted to be there. Paige and the team, they truly opened door. We really worked so well together with the shared services, being able to, again, much like you said, pick up the phone, make a phone call and say, hey, we need X. It was invaluable. So, looking back in hindsight, you do what you have to do from a field or an emergency standpoint, but to have a actual physical edifice to put into place, to me, was invaluable.
Yeah, and one that was designed to take care of patients.
Correct.
That had been, interestingly enough, my mother had been in that building back in the 90s when it was a rehab, when I think it was owned by Kessler. She had done some of her rehabilitation there after a stroke. Just to have a hospital next door, literally next door, with people who I agree, the wanting us there part, I think was incredibly important. I think I was shielded considerably from the local politics of the convention center. I got some parts of it, but I think most of it I was kind of shielded from. But it explained a lot why it was operated almost in anonymity. Like, it's kind of like we didn't really want people to know it was there. It felt a little bit like a CIA black site, as opposed to when we were in East Orange. It was like, this is where we are. Come and find us. And it gave us an opportunity, because Essex County had been so hard hit, as we were developing what would the ACS portion of this look like, what would be the next mission if it wasn't going to be recuperating inpatients. Having conversations with the County of Essex, having conversations with the Newark Health Department, being right next door, I think was incredibly important. Talking to somebody else about this, the North Jersey FMS, so the one that we were part of in Secaucus and then in East Orange, was successful. But if you take any one kind of person out of that equation, like if you hadn't been there, if Mike and Jenny hadn't been there, and all what they brought, if we hadn't had somebody like Paige, if we hadn't had the executive cleaning service step up, I don't think it would have been as successful as it was. We had an incredible group of people who were very much like-minded, that were able to adopt the philosophy of, let's just do it.
I feel like we made a difference. That's probably, and I'll speak about just being in public service. It's nice knowing that you made a difference. And I think think that this is a prime example, just the way you described it, is that, you had people that, maybe were a little sick in the past, but not really sick to this level. And I feel like we made a difference, turning them around and putting them on a good trajectory for a healthy, life. So it's a good feeling.
A lot of the hospitals in North Jersey, if you're able to take 3 or 4 patients off of them that can go, that's a big difference. Christ Hospital in Jersey City, if you could take a handful of patients from them, University Hospital, if you could take 3 or 4 patients at a time from them, and that's kind of the numbers we were getting, gave them some breathing room to get somebody out of the emergency department, to get the next person, to get somebody out of the ICU so the next person could come in. And over again, they were just so incredibly appreciative to anything that we were able to do. It will be forever the most unique experience I will have ever done medically.
No, that was it, you're right, and I think again it goes back to the collaboration. So you talk about a Sarah Kacharsky, and when she did have a concern, we sat down, we talked about it. Nothing was done in a vacuum about it, because again it goes back to what we talked about maybe a half hour ago. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just need to know who is, and then leverage them so that we can make the best decision. So it was really again monumental, and it's interesting because I'm just sitting here reflecting. We're talking about just the one that we set up in the North region, and simultaneously or very shortly thereafter, like it was like in 2-week increments, we set up one in South Jersey, we set up one in Central Jersey, and we had them all running, where we were tasked with setting up 1,000 beds. And we had them all up and running, and it was just amazing that we were able to do that.
And not only that, but at that time, you all were intimately involved in ensuring that not only were you decanting patients from hospitals, but quite frankly, you were also decanting the bodies of people who died in hospitals, and hospitals couldn't get the patients to the funeral homes, and they needed space.
The vaccination centers were another huge project that we had to do. We had these mega sites for vaccine, North, Central, South, and we had the community-based ones that were smaller. So then we had a federal site that we opened up in North. That was when that was it for me.
Right.
And it was fortunate. I tell people, and I don't really talk about what I've done in my past, but talk about being able to end a career on a high. I can't think of a better way to have ended a career. When we opened up the federal site in Newark, I was there for the opening day, and it was like, okay, I feel like now's a good time.
Well, that's the other interesting thing, is that I finished the field hospital thinking that this was, when I got involved in it, this was going to be the biggest thing that I ever did. And I came out of the field hospital feeling that way. And then, of course, the pandemic continued, and I joined the Department of Health and all the things you just outlined. And it turned out that the field hospital wasn't the biggest thing, because the whole pandemic ended up being,
that's right,
the biggest thing that we ever experienced and we ever did. And it's hard to process. But I like to reflect back, I think, to the field hospital, because it does have that beginning, middle, and end part to it. Now, when you finished up, probably that would be about, December, January. When did you finish up? March of 21?
I left it all. June. No, that's not true. May of 2021 is when I left it all. Yeah.
Okay. Did you need a little bit of a break to recover? Did you take some time off?
Yeah. I literally took 3 weeks off. I took 3 weeks off and jumped back in and did some consulting work. Yeah. When you go from 100 miles per hour, 7 days a week, 365, it's hard to just come to a screeching halt. And I'm not wired that way. So I literally ended my state government career, and I took a 3-week sabbatical and jumped right into full-time consulting, which I was back into the saddle 5 days a week. So not much of a break.
What I've been doing with everybody is asking the same set of questions. And I think you just answered the first one, which is, how do you feel about your time in the pandemic response? It sounds like this was sort of the capstone of this portion of your career.
Yeah, that's actually a very good way of putting it. I couldn't think of a more rewarding way to end my career. Most people at the end of their career, they go into a glide path where they're kind of
Mhm.
just like setting themselves up to kind of go out into the pasture. And it was nonstop running and gunning. But to reflect 3, 4 years later, it almost seems surreal that it really
Yep.
happened.
I agree. And what impact do you think having done what you did during the pandemic has had on you now?
That's an excellent question. As I started out, I said I've always been involved in public service, and this just fostered my desire to be in public service, which is the reason why I'm working as I am now. I feel as though that I'm here to help, and that experience where we had a team of individuals put together to accomplish a major mission. What it does for me to this day, it just fuels me where I'm always can do, will do. I don't care what it is you give me. I don't care how much of it is that I'm given. I feel that there's nothing that I can't accomplish just because of what we accomplished as a team. It's just a
It
matter of
does.
having the right people around you. That's it.
Yep. It does. It does make accomplishing ordinary tasks seem ordinary when you've done the things that you had to put together.
It's fun. It's funny you say that, Doc, because there are people who say to me that it's like you have an endless amount or endless ability to take on responsibilities, and I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
just keep them coming, keep them coming. We'll get it done. We'll get it done. That's it. And even though the team that I had was super unique in their ability, I feel like I have the ability to create other synergies where maybe not replicating that type of team, but replicating that type of outcome.
Yeah, I have to say that for me, that one of the things that pandemic just reinforced for me is you can find teams anywhere, and you
Yeah.
can find people who don't believe that they're team players, and they can get them and to collaborate in ways that they become a team.
That's it.
And the whole pandemic reinforced the importance of teamwork to me.
Was not a solo. This was not a solo
No,
act. There was no one
oh no,
person who was the end all be all. This was all about a team.
too big. So, what are you most proud of in your pandemic response?
You know, you know what? I'm really proud that working in New Jersey government, and I'm sure you can appreciate this having spent time with the Department of Health. Nothing happens quickly. Nothing does. Everything is very slow, methodical.
Yep.
There's a lot of bureaucracy, red tape that you have to cut through. However, it's refreshing to see that the state has the ability to spin up resources and to basically fix it. Maybe not perfectly, but the state has the ability to spin up resources and fix things. And I think a lot of it has to do with those blue sky relationships. It's not phony. I remember we had. I can't remember the entity that came in, but there was an audit that we had done within the state government, and there was, as I recall it, they started asking certain questions of each different entity, and the one thing that came out of it that I remember correctly was that you guys legitimately all have relationships. It's not something that we put on paper. The state literally has relationships throughout all of their parts to come together, and I'm really proud to know that I was a part of something so monumental and to have been able to accomplish the mission of making people safe.
And lastly, because I always believe that turnabout's fair play, do you have any questions for me or last thoughts on anything that you didn't get a chance to talk about?
You know what, Doc? I want to say that I really appreciate you even contacting me to do this. There's a million of other people that you could have engaged, and I appreciate it because we sometimes forget where we've been and what we've done, and to have an opportunity to kind of reflect on this with you, it's a feel good moment. It's nice to see what we've done. And so I appreciate it. I thank you for putting the effort out there to do this. And I thank you for including me in this, because this is a really special moment. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I have to tell you, the funniest thing is your ears should be burning all the time, because there is not a conversation about the field hospital where your name doesn't come up. I mean, everybody knows. I mean, seriously, everybody knows Clay. And I know how hard it is when you're responsible for being the middle person and remaining calm. And everybody came and complained to you. Everybody had concerns. Just like everybody came to me with concerns. And regardless of what it was, you searched for a solution with us, or you talked it out, or you pulled something out of a hat and got these things done. And pulling out a hat makes it sound really easy. And one of the magical things I think about professionals are they make things that are incredibly difficult look easy. And it's not easy. It's a lot of work. You spend a lot of time becoming that person. You spend a lot of time doing those things. But on the outside, it looks really easy. And so, yeah, there is not a conversation with anybody who is involved in the field hospital where your name doesn't come up. Or the team. I mean, that's how we just refer to you all. This is the team or the guys. Think about, for people like Patty and I, when in my career would I have ever worked with law enforcement, OEM, military personnel, and to learn and see those different cultures, to be, quite frankly, accepted by those cultures as somebody who's on a level with them, and then get to collaborate with them. We were asking them to do incredible things. The average person walked into the place, yes, I want you to take care of a patient on a novel virus that may kill you in a convention center using paper charting, and try to be as realistic and minimalistic as possible, but make sure they get everything they need.
That's right. Yeah.
And nobody said no.
No. Again, it's just one of those things that also is a feel good moment. It's just that everyone was all hands on deck. Everyone understood the assignment.
And again, I think everybody brought their superpowers to the table. And in a relatively low ego environment. When there were issues, the issues weren't over somebody wanted to be in control or anything else. It was they had a legitimate point of view that they were incredibly concerned about, and they felt they had to make noise in order to have it heard, because they were all in also.
That's right.
So the frictions weren't ego frictions. They were point of view and concern frictions. And I'll take those any day.
You have to have those, because that brings about healthy conversations and different perspectives that you may not have taken into consideration.
I have to tell you, I honestly, getting to see you work and your colleagues on the IMT was just fantastic. It's a level of kind of quiet professionalism that you rarely get to see. Thank you for joining us for the Pandemic Files, produced and copyrighted by Griffin Medical LLC. For more information, please visit our website, thepandemicfiles.com.